Bonjour. Hello, everybody. My name is Harald. I'm the CEO and curator of the Futurio Institute, and I'm delighted to guide you through the next session on mobility. First, we got to hear some keynote speeches and an intro on insights on mobility with Reuben. He's the head of the Shift project. And later, we have two exciting panels on transportation in two different areas. One is going to be shipping with a luxury brand, as well as looking at the last mile on mobility. But before we go into, with Geopost, before we go in, let's welcome Reuben on stage and get us tuned into the session. Welcome.
Good morning. I'm honored and delighted to be here to share with you a few conclusions from the study that we have done on freight transport in France. My name is Reuben Fischer, and I've worked on this subject for the Shift project since 2020. Harald gave me a promotion. I am definitely not the head of the Shift project. I'm in charge of freight project management, but the head of the Shift project is Mathieu Ozano, who's here in the crowd, and also Jean-Marc Jancovici. I did this on a pro bono basis, as I have a daytime job as a sustainability manager within a French company that works in the transport and logistics sector. And I'm now co-founder and manager of a sustainability cooperative consulting firm called Novalera. Despite the English name, the Shift project is actually a French entity. It's a non-profit, it's a not-for-profit association guided by scientific rigor. So basically, when we aim to discuss subjects, we talk about facts and figures, and we don't base our arguments on ideologies. We aim to contribute and to aim to influence decisions on subjects pertaining to two things: energy on one hand, and carbon emissions or greenhouse gas emissions on the other hand. We've coined a term which we use very frequently, which is the double carbon constraint. Constraint number one, we feel, is that we have to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. But as if that wasn't enough, constraint number two is that we feel that we need to prepare for scarcer fossil fuels in the future. With this double carbon constraint in mind, in March 2020, during lockdown, we kicked off a project called the Transformation Plan of the French Economy. So the acronym is in French, PTEF. And the aim is to, field by field, work out how we can do three things. Aim for a low-carbon functioning, a less carbon-intensive freight, for example, in my case. Number two, make the sector more resilient, all the while preserving employment and making sure that in our systemic approach, we focused on the amount of energy that we needed in total for all of the fields, and we were careful to check that it didn't exceed total energy production capacity. This led us to certain conclusions about frugality, more of which a little bit later. A summary of the different findings of the sectors on which we worked on are compiled in a book, which, much to our surprise, has sold over 100,000 copies in France. So the report on the freight sector was published in March 2022, and in the work leading up to then, when we interviewed company representatives and we asked questions about energy consumption and frugality, quite often the action was, meh, it wasn't really a subject. So this isn't to say that we told you so, but it is a gentle reminder that the subject of energy, both in terms of costs and in terms of supply, has become much more visible and acute, as those examples from here and in England go to show. Last year in the UK, the cost of energy rose so much that we needed to implement what we call warm shelters. Basically, for families who couldn't afford to heat their homes, they went to safe spaces to get relief from the cold. And without saying that it's going to be the same thing in France, I'd just like to point out that there's been a 10% increase in the cost of electricity for households. So that's the energy part in terms of climate change. But linking back to greenhouse gas emissions, this is an example of what can happen to railway tracks in what we used to call extreme heat. roads don't fare that much better in what are going to be, unfortunately, future normal temperatures. This leads me to think about a quote from a science fiction author called William Gibson, who wrote a novel called Neuromancer and who coined the term cyberspace. And his point of view is to say that the future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed. But then again, when we do talk about the future, the reaction is, well, what's the rush? It's the future that we're talking about. Well, actually, to fundamentally change things, to fundamentally transform our society, these are the various timeframes that we're looking at. So it takes more or less 15 years to completely renew a fleet of vehicles on the road, so moving, for example, from fossil fuels to electric. We're talking about 20 years to completely modify our energy mix, so moving from natural gas and coal to renewables, for example. 30 years to redesign the whole industrial landscape, so bringing back into our respective countries some of the things that we exported to other countries in terms of infrastructure and production capacity. And more or less 50 years to design future-proof towns. So when you look at it like that, we are already late for the future. But let's drill down to freight. Because in this period of virtual reality, cloud storage, metaverse, and digitalization, we are still in the same place. We need to move stuff from one site to another, to process it, to refine it, then move it somewhere else, by boat or bike, by truck or by train, to assemble or transform, then move the stuff again to another site, to stock, to set up, or to sell. It's the way our physical economy works. It applies to agriculture, commerce, the health industry. It's been that way for ages. And that's why we refer to freight as the keystone or the cornerstone of the economy. For all this to happen, we need energy to fuel the transportation. The vehicles need infrastructure to move along, rail, road, or inland waterway, and labor, because all of this is dependent upon labor, packing, unloading, shipping, etc. As an illustration, we say that Paris and other major cities only have 3 days of stock of food ahead of them. So in a way, no freight, no French cuisine. So if we can't do without freight, it looks like we're going to have to decarbonize it. The data I'm displaying is for mainland France, and on the graph on the left, basically what we see is that at best emissions have flatlined. And actually, even though emissions for transport sector went down last year in 2023, they are still higher than they were in the reference year 1990. Moreover, in terms of energy that's used to transport stuff, 90% of what's transported in France is still dependent and still uses liquid fossil fuels. So how come? Like people who work in the transport sector, we're all climate baddies? I think, of course not. We've made fabulous technological improvements in terms of energy efficiency, in terms of intensity of carbon intensity, in terms of energy. We've improved our operational processes to increase vehicle fill rate, but unfortunately none of that is enough, and emissions have not gone down. The graph shows that different factors in what we call the Kaya identity, which contribute to overall greenhouse emissions. And the ones that you see outlined within the red box are above 1, and these are the factors which have increased emissions, and the ones which are in the green circle are the ones that have brought emissions down. So we can see that we have some factors that have brought down emissions by 10%, such as energy efficiency, but when we compare this to the factors that have increased emissions, which are 2, basically increased transport and the move to road transport, we see that the scale is completely different. We've got 10% on one hand and 200% or 340% on the other hand. So in a nutshell, when we say that we're multiplying by 3 the amount of things we transport and multiplying by 2 the share of road transportation, we can continue to make as many technical or technological improvements or innovations, but the differences in scale between marginal gains on one hand and the fabulous increase in emissions on the other hand is not just it means that we just can't rely on innovation or technology to help solve the problem. So maybe we need a helping hand. And when I'm talking about a helping hand, I'm going to talk about law. So bear with me for a moment. Our report contains 55 measures, so obviously I'm not going to go through all of them. I'm going to try to highlight 3 quite quickly. The first one is that in France, freight depends on 2 sets of law, One of them is town planning and the other one is transport. But at the national level, there's no consolidation. So we feel that there should be a form of ministry or another such entity which should be in charge of governing both the sector and implementing a pathway and making sure that entities respect that pathway of reductions. At a second level, at a regional level, we suggest that in terms of administrative management, any given region has the capacity to organize the physical aspects of freight, making sure that it's pulling the actors together of the ecosystem to ensure opportunities for pooling, for example. We need to reinforce the framework for towns to actually organize, regulate, and subcontract, for example, urban logistics, enabling them to deploy cycle logistics and pooling of goods. And actually, the existing legal framework between what transport authorities can actually do now and what we suggest they should do in the future, the current remit isn't that far off. And when we asked private companies what they felt about this, surprisingly enough, the answer was overall quite positive. Basically, they said that as long as the rules are the same for all, so a level playing field, with a mid to long plan to give companies sufficient view of what's coming up on the horizon, then it was actually fine for everybody. A second suggestion which we think would be useful to see on the horizon is a specific framework for business creation and running, based on a solid foundation of knowledge of energy and climate issues linked to the freight sector. This means that, for example, for existing examinations and capacities, they need to be amended and updated, so both for drivers and transport license holders. But also for company owners, we recommend a kind of climate capacity without which the company owner cannot open or run a business in the transport sector, or the freight sector, sorry. More generally, we believe that a substantial training program on the subject of climate and energy issues should be implemented for all players in the sector to bolster general knowledge, but also to make sure that we increase understanding of both the subject in general and the answers to the crisis in question. The second point in this is what we call a decarbonization effort certificate. Basically, this effort would reward both shippers, freight forwarders, and transporters on the basis of, for example, average emissions per ton kilometer with an enforced reduction pathway. So this year, these are your emissions. Next year, you're allowed to emit a little bit less. The second thing would be based on average energy consumption per ton kilometer, also with a reduction pathway. This, we feel, would obviously help to encourage shippers, freight forwarders, as well as the whole sector to implement the various changes which enable a less carbon-intensive transportation. I've shone the spotlight on a couple of measures, but I have to stress that taken in isolation, maybe they don't seem as logical as they should be, because the 55 measures are all part of one bundle. I'd like us to just have a quick look at the results that we get in our projection of freight in France in 2050. If we do implement all of the measures and the proposals that we put forward in our report, in 2050, freight emissions are 97% lower than the business-as-usual scenario, which takes into account population growth. The main levers of the decrease in emissions, in order of importance, are electrification, which makes up for almost 50% of the reductions, but only when we have reduced demand. So only when we transport less, and this reduction is something around 30%. Then we have what I may say the more usual factors, such as the modal shift to rail and waterway transport, making up for about 10%. And then 4 levers with a similar level of impacts, which are eco-driving, massification, pooling, and cycle logistics. Sometimes we get the question, why bother doing all that anyway? Can't we just implement technology and can't we get the same results doing it that way? So if we go back to the energy constraints which I mentioned at the beginning of the slides, if we do bet on unlimited supply of cheap and less carbon-intensive energy, we don't think it's a good idea, but we did the calculations anyway. So what the graph shows is that basically 4 different options. The first 3 are we change as little as possible in terms of operational process. There's no work done on any frugality, and we just change the energy vector. First graph is biofuels, biodiesel. Second graph is hydrogen. The third bar is all electrification. And the fourth, which is the option that we promote, is a mix of all of that, but having first implemented all of the necessary frugality. So as you can see, basically, there's a scale of 1 to 3 between the amount of energy that's needed if we do implement frugality and different changes to reduce the amount of transport that we do, and if we just bear with technology in the business-as-usual scenario, just changing the vector that we use. To summarize what I'd love you to remember after this talk, first and foremost, that it can be done. We can reduce emissions. We can do this whilst improving resilience and creating jobs within the sector. This, I feel, is excellent news which I would like to highlight. And the 6 main levers to make this happen are, number 1, I think I've said it a couple of times, reduce demand. Number 2, plan and govern the sector. Number 3, electrify everything we can. Number 4, move to alternative modes of transport, so rail and inland waterway. Number 5, redesign urban areas in general, but also to include cycle logistics. And number 6, train, teach, certify, and qualify to make sure that all of the actors in the sector understand what is being done, what the risks are, what's at stake, and why we are proposing a certain amount of answers and solutions. I'm going to add a postscriptum. The event that we are attending is called Change Now, and it's not called Change Later. So I was thinking about this, and well, what can we do at a very short-term basis? We've seen the actions that we need to get results in the next 20 years, and I think many companies and many organizations have plans for 2030, 2040, 2050. There's one simple and immediate action which I feel that we all can do, and that's to slow down. When I say this, I mean, for example, slow down the trucks that are on the motorways that currently drive at 90 kilometers per hour in France, Italy, and Spain, and bring them down to 80 kilometers per hour, like it is the case in Germany. According to our calculations, this would enable us to reduce emissions in France by 2 to 3% of the transport sector, therefore just one measure which will enable us to hit our yearly target. In terms of cost efficiency, we also think that this is one of the cheapest ways, if not also a way of saving money, when you bring that to what does it cost on one side and how much carbon am I economizing on the other side. So in a nutshell, let's slow down, let's be frugal, let's implement the various operational improvements which will be discussed in the following sessions, and electrify all the remaining road transportation.
Thank you, Reuben. And sorry for the promotion.
Fine, better that way than the other way.
All right. Yeah, we saw a lot of numbers. Now let's talk with some of the leaders in this new space. And I'd like to call on stage Sonia Le Masne and Guillaume Legrand. Please. Thank you both for sharing your knowledge now, because I'd like to just start with asking you to introduce yourself so that we get warmed up for the session. Sonia, please.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Very happy to be here at Change Now. Very honored with a great background. I'm Sonia Le Masne. I'm in charge of sustainability for Martell, Mumm, Perrier-Jouët. It's the prestige affiliate of Pernod Ricard, so 2 champagne houses, Mumm and Perrier-Jouët, and 1 cognac house, Martell. And my role is to transform our corporate commitment into reality, into action plans. I've been in sustainability now for 13 years, and how to make commitments and a reality is by engaging with stakeholders, change makers, internally, inside the company, but also externally. And what we're going to discuss today is a great illustration of that. I think the role of a bigger company is to help solutions emerge, grow, and scale. And that's exactly what we're trying to do here.
Awesome. We will go into the details. And also, Guillaume, don't talk about there are going to be some exciting in 3 minutes. How did you get to where you are? And introduce yourself, please.
Thank you, Harald. Thank you, Sonia, and everybody to be here today. My name is Guillaume Legrand. I'm the co-founding CEO of TOWT, which is a French company that stands for Transoceanic Wind Transport. For the past 14 years now, we've been using existing traditional sailing vessels to move cargo, either across the ocean or more on coastal routes. And of course, right from the start, we were having in mind the new designs, the new build of large sailing cargo vessels. Not going into any more details for now, but just the main observations was that the gigantic shipping, largely leveled down in terms of prices, industry would struggle, to say the least, to decarbonize, while we've got new technologies allowing us to route vessels across the oceans, materials that are allowing us to build much more powerful riggings.
Guillaume.
And sail should not be underestimated if you want to actually decarbonize maritime transport.
Are you an engineer? What's your background?
Well, I'm not. I don't know what I am. It's just 14 years.
Professional entrepreneur.
I'm a fanatic of sail cargo for the past 14 years. I did my studies in France and lived several years in Germany and in the UK as well. And I was more, when I was 24, 25, sort of searching myself more into the sort of whole Kyoto process and carbon pricing. That's where I sort of come from, while having that sort of seawater in the veins that hasn't really left me ever.
All right, we'll dig deeper into the seawater in a minute. Let's start with Sonia on, well, you are the CSO of the group of your subsidiary. And in your role, you look at the whole landscape of sustainability, corporate responsibility. Take us a little bit about what's sort of zooming out from the roadmap, and then maybe diving deep into the challenges you try to address with this corporation.
Yes. So as I said, we are crafting exceptional champagne and cognac. So our activity is relies on well-functioning ecosystem and conviviality. And at Pernod Ricard, our CSR strategy is articulated around 4 pillars: valuing people, responsible hosting, because we're selling spirits and there is no conviviality in excess, and 2 environmental pillars: nurturing terroir and circular making. Nurturing terroir is especially important for us because champagne can only be made in Champagne, and cognac is also can only be produced in cognac. So we need to take very good care of our terroir, and that's why we are moving to regenerative viticulture. I've seen Biosphere, I think, in the room. We're working with change makers, experts on the ground. They can be regenerative farmers, they can be engineers, they can be supply directors that are proactive, like Loïc Mormont. He's not here today, but he was initiating the initiative originally. So, and then circular making. Circular making is linked to our SBTi carbon trajectory. We've been working since 2019, lowering our emissions on the 3 scopes, scope 1, 2, 3. It starts obviously with viticulture. Then we're working on packaging also, and low carbon distillation for cognac. And then the 4th emission source is transportation. And since 2019, we've reduced our transport emission by 30% already. That's been driven by the work on the optimization of the load, moving away from air freight. It's been also driven by favoring multimodal, so revert routes when they are available between Reims and Le Havre, or train between Bordeaux and Le Havre. And also lobbying for opening new routes on train, for example. We hope soon between Niort and Le Havre. But still, we have almost 50% of our transport emissions that are driven by maritime transport. So we needed a breakthrough innovation. And in 2020, the first time we met Diana and Guillaume, the solution they were presenting was not only efficient and reliable, but by far the most efficient in terms of decarbonization, over 90%. And that's why we wanted to jump in on the adventure and make a volume commitment. And now the story is coming to life because in a couple of months now, in June, the first ship is leaving Le Havre for New York with on board 85% of the load is the champagne and cognac from our company. So we're very excited, and I think there is a quick video that can just illustrate what we are talking about.
All right, let's see the video. Wow, Guillaume.
Hey, Harald.
Sonia introduced you to say, when we saw the solution, it was efficient and it was amazing and saving, and it was crazy, no?
Yeah, it was, right from the start.
It is crazy.
Very counterintuitive. Crazy, yeah, I've heard it a lot, but what's the, the line is fine between the genius and the craze, right?
Take us through, let's say, this journey. How did you see the opportunity, challenge, but as a startup guy, obviously you see, okay, there's a big problem, here's a solution. And then some details about the vessel, because it's obviously so impressive.
Well, looking backwards, certainly my youth and where I've come from certainly has influenced it a lot, because of course I sort of sense the power of wind. We use wind a lot for pleasure-seeking business or for yachting business or for racing on behalf of sponsors, but what is the point of going around in the water and using that sail for no other point than just going around in the water? So, and no one was really able to actually harness it into the speed or route it, and everything came in the 2010s as new vessels were coming in. Well, there were traditional vessels that we started working with. What is the actual relevance of sail cargo in a world that is only looking big, looking only as the cheaper the better, because that's what shipping industry is about. It's 90% of the products around us. It's still 3 to 4% of world's emissions, which is about twice that of Germany, 4 or 5 times that of France. And we can't reduce it because they don't exist to us. They're in the international waters, so they legally virtually don't exist. And they're within that black box of the container of the shipping company that retains that information that you eventually pay for, but that you can't really know about in full transparency. So the disruptive challenge was to understand that shipping industry was not going to decarbonize, and this is what we sort of thought 15 years ago, and what actually turns out to be real, not going beyond the sort of smoke screen or sort of mirrors.
Even the latest announcements of their association are pushing to 2050, or just...
No, but they may well say whatever they want. The only laws of physics will ever apply. You know, it's fine with these nice graphs, but is look at future generations in the eyes now. Is not only, or what we call the very fuel-centric approach, that because we're in such sort of energy-centered and fuel-centered world, at least in terms of maritime shipping, that going outside of new fuels is something that it's not even possible. So a sailing vessel will suddenly drift, that the whole hydrodynamics around it will need to be totally redesigned, as well as a rigging. We have never built a rigging which is a masts and sails in our modern world. So that's what we did. The shipping industry hasn't suddenly been able to challenge itself enough to come up to that level of decarbonization. This is what we're offering now. Sometimes, what is a wind farm? Isn't that just the good old sort of windmill of the Middle Age somehow? Being sensible is not always looking at some things that no one understands anything about. It's also looking at getting real. And the reality is that we are able to be really powerful in terms of riggings now, that there is a real value in transport. Is not peanuts. No. It does exist. There are dockers, there are sailors, there are ship makers, there are ship owners in general. So that's what we want to put in value. A bit like in the organic field or in the sustainable field in general, if you manage to give a product that sort of relates it to its terroir, to its origin, that sort of seminal umbilical relationship it has to the soil, to champagne in English happens to be le champagne for those of you that speak French, which is the wine, obviously, the sparkling, most noble wine of France, but also la Champagne, which is obviously the region that to the descendants of Mayflower somehow as something very deeply ingrained in their mind that is important to be revealing. And if you decarbonize, you give value to your ability to project yourself. I think 98% of the cognac is exported, something like 60% of champagne. We work a lot with coffee on the imports, with Belco, with several very large brands on massive scale. 100% of the coffee obviously is imported because it doesn't grow here. If you start projecting yourself and want to be real, concrete, immediate, start decarbonize now, and the physician inside you is sort of looking at LNG or ammonia or hydrogen with a bit of a sort of, let's say, necessary doubt about its ability to be up to the level of the promises they're making. This is what we offer. Tremendous technologies, carbon mast, routing that comes from the sort of large sort of racing technologies. And Anemos, as you saw, is built in France. It's currently in Concarneau, southern Brittany, and we are quite proud of it. Operations are starting in a couple of months' time. There's hundreds of people working on it at the moment. There's going to be sailors going at sea in a few weeks for us, and obviously having, Martell and Mumm and Perrier-Jouët, these three houses, and the group as such, with the shoulders of the giants, for us has been something entirely game-changing, not only because these sort of corporate multinationals were suddenly getting interested in us, but also because they had exactly the same vision. They knew that the other big guys weren't going to decarbonize no matter what, and they wanted to decarbonize their own footprint, be able to tell about what they do in the vineyard, what they do in the distilling process that they also decarbonize, and then you come with a large sailing cargo ship, and one image is 1,000 words, right?
So take us back to maybe the first meeting with either a big corporate or here with a house and say, well, I have the postcard, look at this. How often did they send you away?
We were moving 20, 50 pallets across the oceans of rum, coffee, cocoa, and across the Channel to the UK, etc. And from Pernod Ricard, Martell, Mumm, Perrier-Jouët, that was peanuts. That wasn't even the cherry. But we had been working on new designs, obviously on new plans, and we came out and said, we've got 1,000 pallets. with 10 sailors. We're going to keep the freight rates
Everything
low.
is on Euro pallets in the cargo?
Well, any pallets will do, yeah. We've got, we've got 6 hulls, 3 decks, and yeah, it's all loaded in pallets, yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
So it's not like some kind of container?
If we put it containers, we would have lost about half of the payload, and we would have a soapbox like any sort of container carrier. We wanted these fine lines of what is required from the sort of hydrodynamics to have a proper fast sailer, because we said to Loïc that we were able to make it from Le Havre, the mouth of the River Seine, to those that don't know, la puissance du port du Havre, the largest port of France, to New York in 13 days. And it happens today.
Is that faster than Greta?
It happens, well, I'm not sure about Greta, but I'm sure about the way a pallet of Mumm is moved at the moment. It goes into a container, and out of the container in New Jersey, it takes between 28 and 35 days.
All right, you cut it in half even.
We are slightly slower.
Yeah.
It might seem paradoxical, but because you don't have to transship it, you're not sort of congested in terms of containers and terminals, etc. And we're faster eventually. So we actually move the cargo 10 days faster than what the polluting container carriers will do. In terms of reduction of the carbon footprint, we have 2 very small engines. We're looking into how to change these fuels too, because we have to, in 2024, do our port maneuvers, our channeling into the port approaches with thermic propulsion. But 99% of the time, we are able to hoist the sail and keep that 10.5 knot speed, which is about 17 kilometers an hour, to New York, to Colombia, to Brazil, and back each time. We cargoes back. We also delivers cargo to the south. And on each leg, it's at least 90 to 95% reduction, sometimes 99, and we are able to convey that message to the end customer with a carbon logbook and a label called
Let's
Animals.
talk about messaging on the brand. One part is you give a little icon, new sticker emoji to Reuben, so maybe because there was a cargo bike, new thing, but maybe there's a sales shop now. Where's Reuben? So we put him in this
for your presentation, Reuben.
Sonia. Obviously, this is a fantastic, exciting, crazy project, and but it gets real. And so, what does it mean for you, for your role? How do you brand it? How are you messaging it? And how is that, let's say, part of your overall, let's say, maybe new initiatives and actions you do? But one big thing is, well, there is a first launch, but you're committed to really go all the way. So let's maybe see on your side on
it's
on the vessel.
Not a one-off. It's really the first departure, and now we're rerouting and using TOWT for our shipment to the US because it's efficient in terms of timing. It's the same timing because we slightly longer on the sea, but we gain time in the harbor because it's not congested. It's a true decarbonization, and it answers our needs, also in terms of communication. As I said, for me, it's the illustration of what needs to be done to align action with commitments. So it's very, we need it to achieve our target, SBTi target. We also, I think we have a role to play especially when we play in the luxury segment, to inspire, be exemplary. We have no excuse for the price. I think it's our role also to inspire new narratives. And the boat is just a very nice way to show our commitments through the line, from terroir to the end product. And for example, we have Mumm. Mumm, the brand is its heritage is around explorers, supporting pioneers to move to the next frontier. And for us, that also fits very nicely with the brand. So yes, to conclude, sustainability cannot be done alone. It's always a question of partnership, of coalition. And I think that's my end word is we can't progress alone. So it's our role as big company to find the right partners, also to work very closely with peers to make sure that we make those projects just thrive and come to scale.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was our oxygen, that was our fuel, really. Pernod Ricard coming alongside with us was not only volumes, long-term. I mentioned the cherry. It's actually the cake that we're looking at. We're going to be exporting massive amounts of cognacs and champagnes by sail. We were wary of potential partners that would have just done it for one shot for PR purposes. This is exactly the opposite here. And we are just about to announce that we are ordering 6 more vessels, so we are actually going to be operating 8 vessels on the transatlantic routes. So this is a very deep market, there's very large volumes, and we are extremely and positively enthused by the relationship that we have with Martell, Mumm, Perrier-Jouët and the Pernod Ricard company in general. Bear in mind, they've got bourbons, they've got people in Sweden, in Scotland or in Ireland with #1 brands of the world that are also looking into it. We've got cabins. And that's also part of experience. We've got 6 double cabins per each vessel that might be going along the conviviality around the vessel. And we also age, just 10 seconds on this. I told you about the vessel being very fine, and it happens we've got that 7th hole in the front with no right angle, and it fits perfectly barrels. And we're going to be sailing around the Atlantic for 1 year with barrels of Martell for aging purposes. So this is not only something that will decarbonize from A to B, but that's actually able to transform product, to offer a new product. So this is something that's very intricate and very in-depth in terms of working together with Martell, Mumm, Perrier-Jouët and Pernod Ricard. We'll export many more wines, product from the Opinel knives or Bonne Maman jams. This is indeed luxury with product with an identity that matter. And coffee, cocoa, or sugar is also something that's very key to us. We've got seasons in the vineyard, in the field. We've got seasons of winds, and we've got commercial seasons. You want to make it for Christmas. You want to make it for the harvest. And it happens they all fit very well together. So this is how we're going to start decarbonizing in a few weeks' time after that 13-year experience on traditional sailing vessels.
When you go back now to the, let's say, the first time you went maybe to a shipyard to say, hey, can you build this? And how was this experience? And when there's probably 1 or 2 who said no, but if you look back at, okay, the first time somebody said yes, and how long is this now, the years?
Well, the technicians, the technicalities with the engineers, with the naval architects, really, they were all very thrilled. Because of our philosophy, that was the principal sail propulsion. We want to be able to make most of the journey with all engines switched off, which i.e. makes you decarbonize by over 95% because you go all the way by sail. So it's not really the lofts that we could have had in the past weren't really coming from the technical side, more of very knowledgeable people that have read and spoken about everything, and that they think sail belongs to the candle age, and that is not by improving the candle that you make the bulb eventually. Ha 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 ha. Okay, but wait, sometimes, again, the innovation comes from where you don't expect it. And those that laughed too much, we didn't work with. And those that understood that the meaning of their present was to find in the past the perspectives to the future, were certainly the ones that gathered together. Perrier-Jouët, the French naval shipyard to whom we actually ordered the vessels, 8 vessels is quite a bit, even to them. We met them in 2015-16, and as we say, it wasn't ripe yet, and now it is. Now we're their first clients, and very happy to be sort of hoisting the decarbonizing sort of initiative with a French shipyard.
So now the cognac will be served in the Explorers Club in New York upon arrival, or maybe?
Yeah, we're gonna make big parties. Conviviality is in our DNA, so we're gonna make a celebration when we leave and when we arrive.
Fantastic. Can we all go to Climate Week on your boat?
Oh yeah, that's in New York.
September.
When is it happening?
September.
Yeah, okay. 12 of you.
Yeah?
Have a free ticket, ask Sonia.
Let's go.
There's a golden ticket in each of the Mumm bottle, and if you have the right one, you may be able to cross on a sailing boat with me.
And you tried it one or twice before. If you start in June, in September we're going to be safe. The kinks are out.
No, don't worry, we'll be safe right from the start. Let me touch some wood, and no, we'll be safe right from the start. Let's not talk about any issue that we'll have. We know we go at sea. It's a very inhospitable, obviously, place, and we make everything to be up to the level to the sort of merchant navy to go safely first.
Big round of applause, please, and good luck for this vessel to sail. Thank you. Merci. Merci à vous. All right. I think that's encouraging, and I can't wait for September. Now, staying in the theme of mobility, next up, we're going to talk with Caryn-Ann from Geopost. Please join me on stage. Caryn-Ann. So I think when we talked a little bit about going all the way, now your topic is mostly the last mile, but please introduce yourself and what's sort of your role in Geopost.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. So my name's Caryn-Ann, and I'm the Associate Director for Sustainability at Geopost. So basically, I work a lot on similar topics to what Sonia was saying about really how we can engage more broadly with our stakeholders to accelerate our performance towards our goals. And I've been working in corporate sustainability now for about 15 years.
Wow.
So I started off in it. Originally, actually, I studied politics at university, and I always thought I'd go off and work in sort of the NGO sector. And I had an opportunity to do an internship in what was at the time called CSR.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, maybe there's more impact to be had working within the private sector on some of these topics.
I think that's encouraging, because I think that's exactly the role of the CSOs. If you look, I want to do impact, I go to Greenpeace, which is amazing, but there's maybe not a lot of, not everybody can go there, and we need 50,000 new CSOs or ESG experts next January, 8 months from now, or something. I'm not good in math. So I think that's encouraging that you say, all right, I started with NGOs, but I want to do impact within a corporation. Now, tell us a little bit about, let's say, your project. So what are the challenges in your role, and maybe some of the projects you are proud of?
Yeah, of course. So perhaps I'll start by introducing Geopost just a little bit,
please.
Because I'm not sure that everyone in the room knows who we are.
We have an international audience.
So we are a market leader in parcel delivery and also e-commerce solutions. And we're actually part of the French Post, so La Poste Group. And last year we represented around, I would say, 45% of their revenue. So I think it's maybe a little known fact that La Poste is actually very present internationally. So as Geopost, we are present in around 50 countries, and we operate through a number of local commercial brands. And for those of you that are based in France, you'll probably know us best as DPD or as Chronopost. I think just in terms also of the size of the company at the moment, last year we posted revenue of around just under 16 billion euros, and we delivered around 2 billion parcels in 2023.
Wow,
so that's who we are.
That's a big one, all right.
So obviously,
got our attention.
Yeah, so obviously given the size, we also, and I think it was also, Sonia was saying it, we also have a responsibility in terms of how we can help sort of transform also the parcel delivery sector. And as a business, we have also set ourselves a goal of becoming the international reference in sustainable delivery. And one of the key areas that we focus in on is obviously how we can decarbonize our operations. And around 2 years ago now, we set a net zero target for 2040 that was validated last year by the SBTi. So that's really kind of shifting our focus and really helping us to hammer down on how we can go about decarbonizing. And so to your point about, well, how are we doing that? So I think what's quite interesting is to consider the last mile is probably the most visible part of the iceberg, as it were. It's what everyone sees on the roads is our vans. And we've been working on sort of switching away from diesel vans towards primarily electric in the last mile, I think for over 10 years now. And I think we've made really good progress. Today on fleet, we have around 9,000 low-emission vehicles, and it represents about, today, just under 14% of our overall last-mile fleet. But we need to keep in mind that if we are to meet our net zero target, we need to have reached 100% by 2035, and that's really what we're working on now.
That's your target?
Net
zero
in terms of the
35.
fleet. So no, net zero by 2040.
Okay.
Fully alternative fleet in the last mile by 2035 if we to meet the 2040 goal. And I think it's important to note that obviously for us decarbonization, a big part of it is around electrification, but it's not only about that. I think Reuben also alluded to the fact that it's also about going and continually looking for those operational efficiencies in terms of how we're filling our vehicles, we're planning our routes.
Are you the cargo bike in this slide?
And so we do have a couple of cargo bikes on fleet at the moment. And I think last year we increased it by about a fifth, the number of cargo bikes we have operating in Europe. And it's not only about getting those cargo bikes, it's about how we're going to operate those cargo bikes. So we're also working on building out a series of urban depots, because obviously the closer we are to the city centres, the shorter the final distance, and the more we're actually able to use other alternatives like cargo bikes. So that's also part of the way we're looking to decarbonize the last mile.
So these are kind of little hubs where the cargo bikes go and pick up?
Yeah, well, they can be, well, obviously where some of the vans also come to deliver the parcels, and then they'll go out for delivery from those hubs. Sorry, the depots.
Yeah, and so you have all this vast fleet of, let's say, delivery things and new projects, so to say. So what are some of the challenges also in this business? So, you know, getting new equipment, getting new technology, but what other, you know, hard things are there to crack?
I think, I mean, obviously the question that you asked was around last mile, and I think we've almost got a handle on the last mile. There are some challenges, and I'll get to that next, but I think we're also focusing in on how we can also decarbonize more the line haul. And for those of you that might not know what line haul is, it's more the medium haul, longer haul distances that we travel, typically between the hubs and the final depots. And that's typically, we run those movements with trucks. And so I think we've probably all seen e-vans on the road. I'm not sure how many of us have seen e-trucks on the road. And so that's also an essential part of our plan, because 50% of our carbon emissions actually come from those line haul operations. And so we are working now on diversifying that line haul fleet. Obviously, we believe very strongly in electric truck technology as a way for us to do that. But we're also conscious of the fact that, you know, to have those still need to come to scale. So we're also focusing, at least as a transition fuel, on HVO, for example. But also working more widely within the sector, because we can't do it alone, and we need to help create that demand for zero-emission trucks. And we're actually part of a coalition of companies called EV100+, where we're coming together to make our voices louder and sending a clear demand signal to the market, but also to policymakers, that we want to see the supply of those zero-emission trucks ramped up.
What are, I mean, we heard maybe about the Tesla truck and some of the Nikita or so. What are, can you name one or two suppliers who are already on the road? Like,
So,
Volvo, Scania?
Well, yeah, I don't know if for advertising purposes,
No,
but so the manufacturer that's got the most trucks available at the moment is Volvo. And so we've got actually a number of trucks that we're running within our network at the moment. We have around 9 in Switzerland, and we have in some trucks in the Netherlands and Czech Republic too. And we're trialing electric truck technologies, I think, in France and the UK at the moment.
And these trucks, are they electric, or is this some kind of a hydrogen electric mix?
So for the moment, we're focusing mostly on electric. Hydrogen, we see a use case for them in certain conditions, but not necessarily across our business in the future. So obviously, but one of the challenges that's common to both sort of the e-vans and also the trucks is the charging. And I think that's really one of the areas that we need to look more, and we are looking more closely at, because we've seen now, at least for the last mile, that we lack space at our depots in terms of being able to install the infrastructure that we need to charge our vans. And in addition to that, those issues are compounded by the fact that we don't necessarily always have the power that we need available on the grid on our sites. So we're working now across the business to try and find the right solutions in terms of smart charging, how we can better do load management on those sites. And more broadly also, when we look at the heavy-duty vehicles, it's how we can also work broadly with coalitions, for example, like the Smart Freight Centre. There's also work being done by Milans to understand where we can also, which corridors are the most used in Europe, where we would actually want to see and need to see that infrastructure being installed.
Right. So it's a big orchestration effort with, let's say, new technology, even, let's say, maybe not competition, but co-opetition, just forcing the industry to deliver you. I mean, I can just imagine that at night you have to see all the trucks on the highways just parking. There's not enough parking space for them to sleep, and now where do they want to charge? There's not like a...
Yeah, and I think I mean, we're not speaking that much about the social dimension of trucking,
Yes.
but that's also really important, is what services are available to truck drivers when they are. And it's also almost thinking about charging as how we can also use some of the rest times where they would then be able to charge the trucks during rest times, for example.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's always about bringing the two together at the end of the day.
So maybe some of these innovations, let's say that you initiated, maybe you can kind of give us a couple of examples. Where can we see something
with pleasure.
new and amazing?
So I think it's also about like what is innovation, right? Yeah. Is it only about new technologies? And I think oftentimes it's about maybe bringing some fresh thinking to the fore that actually creates value. And so for us, obviously, I mentioned the net zero, and that's been something that's been a fundamental also commitment that we've made as a business. And we actually introduced last year a new process called the carbon budget, and it's a tool that we're hoping to use as a way to not only strengthen governance around our decarbonisation work, but also to bring together more and more the financial and the non-financial sort of streams within the business. And the way the carbon budget works is that basically we ask our business units to every year fix and to identify their decarbonisation pathway for the year that's coming, obviously in line with the way that we had also built the roadmap to 2040, and then also to put next to that what investments and what spend will be going into decarbonisation in the following year. And the idea there is obviously also to be able to monitor the progress that we're making, but also to see, where is the more value for money coming in. And so I think that's in terms of decarbonisation. Mm-hmm. So I think that's something that's been a really interesting project to have put in place, and it's also something I know that our parent company, La Poste Group, will also be looking to work on. So, so that's, I think, an interesting piece of innovation in terms of fresh thinking to ensure also progress towards our goals. Another innovation I think that's quite interesting is more also focusing on how we serve our customers. So as a transport service provider, we're obviously acutely aware that we are our customers' scope 3. And I think anyone who works in sustainability and GHG emissions accounting has pulled their hair out and trying to get good quality scope 3 data.
Is that like 100 emails coming to your desk, like, hey, Caryn-Ann, we need your numbers?
We need that. So we've we actually developed a carbon calculator. So it was built in-house between the sustainability team, IT, and marketing, and it's since been accredited by an external partner. And the idea there is that we're able to provide our customers with next to real-time visibility on their carbon emissions with us, so for their shipments with us. And I think it's been a really interesting project to work on because, again, in terms of some of the challenges within the sector, it is about data. And so we spoke about scope 3 data, but it's also now the need to have more accurate, reliable data coming through, and ideally from primary sources of data, so not only talking about default or modeling data, etc. And I think that's incredibly important, especially when we look now with new regulations coming in around the CSRD, but also within the transport sector, the European Commission is also working on new reporting requirements through the Counter Emissions EU projects. So it's not only about making sure we have the right data, good quality data, it's also then about how comparable is that data. And also by working on the carbon calculator, it's also making sure that our methodologies that we're using are aligned with the standards in the sector. So the ISO 1403 was published last year, and we've also been involved in some work around identifying the right methodology to calculate GHG emissions for parcel delivery. Again, looking for getting the data more granular and more precise.
So you said already that you're working with your IT people, and do you have somebody in the team reading all the law, and how do you work on applying all these different policies from Europe?
So
it's a complicated sector.
Yes, so no, we work very closely. We have a very small team based in Brussels that obviously we work closely with, and we were also involved in some work around the new HDV CO2 emission standard directive.
What's HDV?
So sorry, heavy duty vehicles.
Okay,
sorry, buses and trucks.
And
so we do have teams that are following this closely. Obviously, the CSRD is also going to be a big game changer for us, but for all businesses in terms of making sure we're ready to comply with that new piece of law. So it's about obviously understanding what the policy environment is, because it's also an enabler for us to be able to move forward. And it's, we talk about collaboration and working in partnership, and it's really across all sectors. It's not.
That is almost a lead into, let's say, the role of the CSO. If we zoom out a little bit, how would you describe, let's say, where you're going in the future? So you're let's say you already said you're orchestrating. with other people, but what is maybe some of the qualities or some of the challenges ahead? How do you describe the future of your role or
no, and I
similar?
think it's a really good, and I think we speak a lot about the idea about engagement, and I think that is really, really important. And I think up until now, businesses have set sustainability strategies, and oftentimes the responsibility for the delivery of those strategies lies with the sustainability team. But ultimately, it's a company-wide project, right? And so I think now for a CSO, it's about how do you onboard and help everyone feel accountable for a company's sustainability goals and journey. And I think that's sort of the new frontier. It's about really creating that culture shift where everybody has some form of ownership for sustainability.
I think that's really important because, as we know, we have data, but if you don't touch people,
No, and I think it's about touching people's hearts and minds, and I think giving them the sense of purpose, as it were, and we don't necessarily need to be sitting in a sustainability team to be contributing in a way to sustainability.
Right.
I think that's
And is that like training things, or
I think it's
a
training,
video or an app?
It's awareness raising, it's walking the talk.
Right.
It's about really creating that culture.
Because that could be a long way from wherever headquarter in the 50s level, and then somebody with a cargo bike down here. So, can you describe some of the ways how you try to create this culture?
Yeah. So, it's about. I think also what's interesting about Geopost is that we are an international business, but we're inherently a very local business. So I think we're not an integrator for those that might be more familiar with the sector. And so we also build a lot on what's done locally within the business, obviously giving the overall direction, but ready to use plug-and-play tools and things like that, but a lot of what we do also happens locally in the businesses, in the business units. So there's no one-size-fits-all. It's about adapting and making sure that what we're doing is relevant locally in terms of that awareness raising and the culture shift.
Right. I think there's, we have a couple of more minutes, so we touched upon, let's say, some technology or innovation in the last mile, and I saw, you have this Estonian company with delivering pizza, I don't know, Star something, now we see all these robots building Teslas, and we have a shortage on labor. I guess it's similar in your profession. Everybody.
So I think at the moment. Obviously there is some labor issues and for drivers and things like that within the sector, which is also why the work that we do as a business to be attractive also as an employer is really important. So sustainability is not only about decarbonization, it's also how you make yourself attractive to talent and you're able to retain that talent. But on the autonomous robots, I think that's also just more around innovation at the moment, seeing how, if we are going to get to net zero, what are some of the other ways that we can also drive towards that? So we have a robot operating in Estonia. We also had a trial last year in the UK in Milton Keynes. And that was highly successful. I think there were maybe last year they did around 2,500 delivery routes with the robot, and they're looking to expand that. So it's.
But is that a gimmick, or is it something?
No, I think it's really about testing to see what could potentially work for us in the future, and it's about it's also about convenience, reliability, and things like that too. So.
Speaking of convenience, one of the last miles, and probably the other. Well, you have the cargo bike, but we see everybody delivering food. It's like not very French, I think. Is that something? Right now there's other companies doing that, but is that something could be part of your portfolio?
So we are
owning the street, basically.
I don't. I know that we are also expanding. So obviously we have our very traditional parcel delivery business, but we're also expanding into new sectors around food and healthcare, for example. So it is part of the way that we see also how we can operate in this space.
And obviously on a personal, non-corporate road, you're speaking for yourself. What do you think about a sailboat?
I think it's a really cool idea, and again, I think it's a really nice way, I think, to also kind of connect the story, perhaps, of a brand like a champagne brand or something like that. And I think, at least for our industry, I think it would depend on the use case, really, to see how we would be able to make something like that happen. But I think it's an interesting, fun way of moving goods around.
All right, so we got to be open to new innovation and new ideas. How do you stay informed? Let's say as a CSO, you look at, we talked about policy, but how is this role shifting in the future? How do you, what are you looking forward to in the next couple of years in this area? So leadership. And we know, and maybe the last add-on to this question, how do we get 50,000 new young Caryn-Anns joining this? What would you say to young people to go into corporates, to be from your NGO role to kind of say, okay, now let's be an activist within the corporate? So that's a long
question and lots in there. So I think, I still don't think that this CSO's job is done, as it were. I think we still have work to do to move towards really fully embedding sustainability within all the processes of the business. And I think, obviously, legislation helps get us there. But again, it's about how do you convince people that it is the right thing to do and that we're not just ticking a compliance box, that it really does bring value to the business. And I think we can see that more and more. And as Geopost, we firmly believe that sustainability is something that differentiates us on the market. I think in terms of how do we attract, and I know there is obviously the skills shortage within the sustainability function. And I think it's, some of the qualities I think that are really important are where you're able to, when you're convinced about something and you're able to influence through the convictions that you have, I think that can bring you very far within the sustainability function. And obviously being able to work really transversely and cross-functionally across the business, because we can't do it alone. And that statement is true for within a business, but also how you are going to move your strategies forward by working with others outside of the business. So you need to be able to work cross-functionally with very different people, very different organizations and structures. So.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you, Anne, for your time, Caryn-Ann, and thank you all. Let's please give a little bit of applause, and thank you to Caryn-Ann.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.